If we analyze your interviews over the last 30 years, it seems to me that your attitude towards Putin changed. Let's say, after 2010 or 2012.
What do you mean?
Well, you did have rather strong criticisms after, for example, the situation with Mir space station, when Mir was sunk.
Yes, and I'll say it again now.
Money was allocated to keep Mir in orbit, but instead, it was sunk with that money.
Yes, and I still hold the same opinion about that decision.
Do you think it was Putin's personal decision?
Well, back then, the Prime Minister was Mikhail Kasyanov.
That's right.
But still, I think decisions like these weren't made without a report.
Where does this sphere of competence lie? After all, such decisions are made based on expert opinions, on the advice of people.
As far as I know, these decisions were made based on a prepared position.
The Washington bosses called and said, "Go ahead, sink it."
Not the Washington bosses. Back then, it was called either Roscosmos, or something slightly different. Our leaders were closely cooperating with the USA on the Mir station. Americans used to come to the station. Relatives already had joint companies. So there was close contact. Do you understand?
Is that a bad thing? It's probably good, isn't it?
It's good for them, of course. But for making decisions? For, let's say, unofficially lobbying American interests? But I'm sure it played a role. In other words, Americans didn't want us to have our own space station anymore.
Was the resource exhausted?
The resource had been exhausted long before that, but it was still operational, and it would have easily lasted for about another 5 years. The money was already there at the time because the price of oil had gone up, and so on. It had already started to pick up a bit, but we knew very well that they didn't want this station to keep working.
Why? Because of competition?
We were independent there. Military experiments could be conducted there. On the Salyut stations, and when Mir was purely ours, we had a section for military experiments. But that doesn't mean, in plain terms, that they were dropping bombs or using lasers. There was reconnaissance and observation, and some kind of information gathering. There were other experiments too. And that's normal. But when the Americans started flying to Mir, we closed that off because they were moving around there. So, it was all shut down. And then, when the Americans, along with us, switched over to the International Space Station, we could have stayed there alone. Again, we could have addressed various issues. It probably would have operated for at least 5 more years. Especially since they sent a sort of inspection mission there. One of the leaders of the Space Corporation Energia flew there, came back, and said that everything was fine, in good condition. But the Americans weren't there. As soon as they demothballed the International Space Station and started working there, the same people who were in charge started subtly saying, "Oh, it's unsafe. Oh, it will fall soon." We, everyone involved, understood that.
Everyone who was involved understood?
I think that everyone understood, except for yes men. There are always people who are ready to play along with the leadership and sincerely support their point of view. Such people can always be found. But the majority understood, and not just the cosmonauts, but also the specialists who worked there. After all, you can always argue that it will collapse soon.
Agree that the safety parameter always leaves an impression, especially on the leaders, because the leader is the one who bears responsibility.
I know this very well from the aviation industry. I saw it when I worked as a test pilot. When you need to stop or slow down some product or something like that, you go to the chief designer, or even lower, but definitely to the chief designer. If you come and say that this is not safe, and if he appreciates you, listens to you, and understands that you're speaking professionally, and you tell him it's not safe, he will immediately stop and ponder. This is an unbeatable argument. It's an old trick. It was used here. And it didn't happen right away. It happened gradually over the course of a year. At first, they said it carefully once or twice, and watched the reaction. It seemed like no one from the space industry came out with a public demonstration of, "Don't touch the station."
When they sank it, the public reaction was actually
When they sank it, there was a very negative reaction in society. Moreover, I think even Putin didn't expect such a reaction. Because when they sank it, and there was a negative reaction in society, I suddenly saw it. It was another cosmonautics day, and no one expected him to come. And suddenly he arrived and started speaking. I realized that the public reaction to the sinking of the Mir station was unexpected for him. None of them in power, in the government, or at the president's office expected that.